Good morning. Today is Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022. Yesterday we discussed the curious prominence on Tisha B'Av on the persecutions of the Crusades in the 11th and 12th centuries in Western Europe, more so than any other catastrophe of the last 2,000 years. And of course, sadly, there are many to choose from. Yesterday, I shared the approach of Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik. And just to add to the question that I asked yesterday, and of course, again, this is today partially based on a wonderful essay by Rabbi Ezra Schwartz. If we just look at the number of victims, of course, each one is an infinite loss, but the number of victims in the Crusades was relatively fewer than other tragedies we mention on Tisha B'Av, and fewer than a number of tragedies that we do not even mention on Tisha B'Av at all. But in addition to the numeric question, there is the qualitative question, which is the Crusades. Yes, they were terrible. Yes, they were destructive. But Jewish life was largely unchanged by the Crusades. Rashi, the famous medieval commentator, was writing before the Crusades. He was writing after the Crusades. Jewish life, especially Torah scholarship and study, was vibrant in Western Europe before the Crusades and maybe even more so after the Crusades. So why so much focus on the Crusades on Tisha B'Av? So I want to suggest a second approach from what we suggested yesterday, and this is based on the father of Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik. This is based on the Rav, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, of blessed memory. And he writes that if we focus on the Torah study and the scholarship, the Crusades had a subtle but profound impact on Jewish life that continues and afflicts us today more than ever. While it is true in France that Torah study continued and flourished after the Crusades, in Germany, the Crusades, the persecution of the Crusades, decimated its Torah scholars. Almost the entire German population of Torah scholarship was destroyed by the Crusades, though it continued in France. But in addition to the traumatic loss of life, there was a qualitative difference between German Torah learning and French Torah learning at that time. In France, Jews were interested in analyzing and comparing passages in the Talmud, asking questions about apparent discrepancies and contradictions, and resolving those questions with subtle distinctions between one case and another, one passage and another. German Torah study at that time had a different feel. German Jews at that time emphasized the emotional aspects of Torah, the real life consequences, instead of the abstract intellectualism of the French. When we mourn the Crusades on Tisha B'Av, we mourn this particular loss of Torah study. Not only did the Crusades cause a loss to Torah in that many lives were lost and many books and subsequent scholarship was lost, but perhaps more important was the qualitative loss. The destroyed German schools represented a slice of life that we no longer have access to. We may have all the facts, all the raw material. However, the emotion, the inner content, the spirituality is sorely lacking. In our world, where information is so easily accessed, but wisdom and meaning remain so elusive, this loss looms larger than ever. And this is more harmfully true today than ever before. The Rav expressed this in another lecture, writing, "This is exactly what is lacking on the American scene." He said American scene. Of course, it applies not only to North America, it applies to all of world Jewry, with exceptions, but generally it applies today, even more so than it did when the Rav spoke, perhaps 50 years ago. "That is why Jews today do not pray as they should," he wrote. "And I am speaking of those who pray 3 times a day. There is no true avoda shebelev, worship of the heart, when it is only a mechanical recitation. This is exactly our greatest need today within the religious Jewish world, to feel and experience God's presence. It's not enough to eat matzah. We must feel the experience of the mitzvah. We must feel the spirituality of the mitzvah. One should not only study Torah, but should actually experience it as a great drama and redeeming act that purges and sanctifies the personality. This is exactly what is lacking in Judaism today. Tisha B'Av is not just about not eating and sitting low to the ground, but rather it is about yearning to return to the closeness, to the feeling of access to holiness and purity and sanctity and intimacy with God. On Tisha B'Av, we mourn not only the destruction, not only exile, not only the persecutions, we mourn what died inside of us. And we have to try to retrieve it. And for that, we invoke the Crusades, which partially caused the devastating problem we face today. My friends, I want to wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.